Okay, in this video we will learn about quadratic equations. Now the very first question which can be asked regarding quadratic equations is like, what are the quadratic equations? So the answer is any equation which is of the form which is of the form ax square plus bx plus c is equal to 0, where a comma b comma c are real numbers and a not equal to 0 is a quadratic equation. So we can now take an example of quadratic equation. For example, we have an equation of the form 5x squared plus 4x plus 5 is equal to 0. It is a quadratic equation because uh, 5 is a real number, 4 is a real number, and 5 is also a real number, and a here is not equal to 0, and value of a here is 5. And now we can also take an example of an equation which is not a quadratic equation. For example, we have x plus 5 is equal to 0. This equation is not a quadratic equation because here we have value of a equal to 0, because this equation can also be written like 0 into x squared plus x plus 5 is equal to 0. This equation can also be written in this form because the value of a here is 0. Hence this equation is not a quadratic equation. In other words, we can also say that an equation is quadratic if if its degree if its degree is equal to 2. Let's say we have an equation at 5x squared plus 4x plus 5 is equal to 0. This is a quadratic equation because its degree is equal to 2. By degree we mean that highest power of x in the equation. The degree of this equation is 1 because the highest power of x in this equation is 1. Let's say we have an equation which is x cubed plus 4x plus 5 is equal to 0. The degree of this quadrant of this given equation, it's not a quadratic equation, but the degree of this equation is 3 because the highest power of x in this equation is 3. So an equation which is having degree equal to 2 is a quadratic equation. Now the very basic question which can be asked regarding quadratic equation is like to find values of a, b and c if we are given any given if we have any given quadratic equation. For example, we have an equation of the form 2x squared plus x plus 7 is equal to 0. Now can you find values of a, b and c while comparing while comparing uh, this equation while comparing given equation with general form of quadratic equation, which is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Now if we compare these two equations, we get a is equal to 2, b is equal to 1, and c is equal to 7. Now that is the very basic question that can be asked, and this particular thing can be used to solve advanced problems that we will be discussing later in the videos. Now the other question which can be asked regarding quadratic equations, and which is pretty basic, is uh, you are given any equation and you have to tell whether it is quadratic or it is not a quadratic. For example, you have an equation x plus 3 into x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now you have to tell whether this is a quadratic equation or not. Then if we multiply this term with this term, we multiply this x with x, then we multiply this x with minus 1, and then we multiply this 3 with x, and then we multiply this 3 with minus 1. So we get x times x is x here, x times minus 1 is minus x, and then this 3 with x is plus 3x, and then we multiply 3 with minus 1, we get minus 3 is equal to 0. And this equation is equivalent to x square, and we combine these two terms, we get x square plus 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. Because the degree of this equation is equal to 2, because the highest power of x here is 2, because the degree is 2, hence this equation is quadratic. Now for example, we are given any other equation which is of the form x minus 1 into x square minus 1 is equal to 0. Now you have to tell whether this is quadratic or not quadratic. Then we do the same process, we multiply this x with x square, this x with minus 1, and then minus 1 with x square, and then this minus 1 with minus 1. So we get x times x square is x cube, and x times minus 1 is minus x, then minus 1 times x square is minus x square, and then we multiply minus 1 with minus 1 and get plus 1 is equal to 0. And because the degree of this equation is equal to 3, degree is equal to 3, which means it is not quadratic. It is not quadratic equation. So what you learned in this video, what are quadratic equations, how to find values of a, b and c while comparing any given quadratic equation with general form, which is ax square plus bx plus c is equal to 0. And finally you should be able to answer if any given equation is quadratic or not, like in this part we just check the we just check the degree of equation, and if the degree of the equation is 2, then it is quadratic, otherwise it is not a quadratic equation.